I just couldn't shake the strange feeling of paranoia. After all those years of working the night shift, I'd never had this feeling before. I only had one coworker at this dinky little diner, Chris, who's been in my grade since middle school, and has worked the same shift as me for 2 years now. We're both juniors in high school, which seems young to be working, but since our town is so small and close-knit, the laws were pretty lax. I'd worked a summer job at Jane's since I was a freshman. It's a 24-hour diner, even though nobody ever came in after 6 a.m., save for Thomas, the town drunkard who would come around the middle of the night occasionally. I'm not disclosing my location here, but our town was in the middle of absolute nowhere, and all you can see in all directions was fields of various crops. The only reason that the management allowed 2 16-year-olds to work the night shift is because everybody knows everybody in this town, and I'd like to think that Chris and I are fairly reliable. Plus, everyone else that works here is at least 60, and probably couldn't stay awake. Like I said, I'd never felt this uneasy before. I kept thinking I saw shadows darting around the edges of the flickering light outside. As I leaned against the front counter, warily studying the windows, I heard Chris turn the tap off from behind me, where he had been dutifully washing dirty dishes. The layout of the diner was very straightforward. A long counter with bar stools cut the building in half. On one side, employees only, was the kitchen consisting of a refrigerator, an oven-stove combo, a tiny sink, and a few cabinets. On the other side was the dining area, where a few booths and tables were situated. A door to the bathroom could be found in the dining area as well. Chris turned around and could immediately tell that I was agitated. "Yo, Jackie, anything wrong?" "I don't know. I'm just being kind of paranoid. It's nothing." "Well, that's easy to do when it's almost 1 a.m., Jack. It'll be fun." He patted me on the back before looking in the fridge. "You hungry?" "I could eat. I can make some pancakes." "I'm more of a waffle man myself," Chris said, grinning. "You got it." I pulled out some ingredients from the cabinets, and Chris handed me a few eggs from the carton in the fridge. "I'll make some bacon while you do that." So we got to work. The sound and smell of the sizzling bacon made me feel like I hadn't eaten in months. Chris had just taken the bacon out of the pan, and I had just put the second batch of batter into the waffle iron, when there was a loud knock at the door. Chris and I both spun around at the same time, looked at the door, then looked at each other. The door was made of glass, and the front wall was lined with windows, so we could clearly see that there was nothing there. "Probably a stray dog or something," Chris said. He was trying to be reassuring, but I heard his voice waver. "Jacqueline, stay here. I'm going to go check outside." "Are you insane? It was probably just Thomas. But we should lock the doors and stay in here until it's light outside. We shouldn't take that risk, Chris." Christopher sighed, knowing I was right. He walked over to the front door and locked it, while I locked the back. None of the windows opened, so we didn't worry about them. The waffles were about to burn, so I went to take them out of the iron. As I did so, I could hear Chris inhale sharply. I dropped the overdone waffles onto a plate and looked back at him. "What?" I asked, thoroughly panicked. "Jackie, don't freak out, but I swear to God, there was a person out there." "I'm telling you, it's probably just Thomas. Let's just stay calm here." "We might be able to stay sane if we close the curtains. That way we can't keep freaking ourselves out," Chris said slowly. I nodded in agreement and began to close all of the curtains. Chris was right. I felt a lot better now. There was no other work to do, so we sat at a table and ate our waffles and bacon. After about an hour, we had calmed ourselves down enough to open the curtains again. Chris, the trash is full. I'm gonna have to take it out. Weren't you the one who told me that we should stay inside until morning? Whatever, Chris, I chuckled. Nothing happened. We were just freaking out over nothing. It will literally take 5 seconds for me to go out and put this bag in the dumpster. Fine. Be quick. As I unlocked and opened the back slot, I sucked in the warm, fresh air that greeted me. It wasn't too hot, but it wasn't too cold, and I loved it. I tossed the trash bag into the dumpster and hesitated for a moment, savoring the climate, before turning to go back inside. As I began to step through the door, though, something grabbed my ankle. I was dragged to the ground, and my chin hit the concrete. Chris was looking out the window at the other side of the diner. "Chris!" I screamed. Whatever it was starting to drag me backwards, away from the door. Chris spun around, but as soon as he started to run towards me, the grip on my ankle released, and I struggled into the building, Chris closing and locking the door behind me. He quickly helped me up and made me sit down on one of the bar stools by the counter. He didn't ask questions at first. He just grabbed the first aid kit from the cabinet and started fixing up my chin. The only reason the diner had a first aid kit was that it was required by law, and all that was in it was a broken thermometer, a few stray band-aids, and some Neosporin. Not much, but enough to tidy up the gash in my chin. When Chris was done, he sat down on the stool next to mine. "What was that?" I'm not sure," I responded, still shaken. Something grabbed my ankle when I turned away. "Jesus," Chris mumbled, trying to think. "The nearest place we could go to is my house, but even that would be too dangerous. There's no lights on out there. We'll have to stay here." "No, we can call the police, stupid," I said, agitated and terrified. Chris looked hurt. "Sorry," I sighed. "Well, let's try the police before anything else, okay?" "Yeah. I left my phone at home today, though. Today of all days." "Well, I have mine and it's fully charged. Don't worry." I pulled my phone out of my pocket and turned it on. No signal. "Well, that's just fantastic. We've got some psycho out here trying to murder us, and we have no cell signal. Amazing." Chris was getting frantic. "Hey, do you think that old landline works?" "Oh yeah, they kept that for emergencies." I rushed over to the phone that hung on the wall and dialed 911. But before it could even ring once, all of the power in the building cut out. I felt tears stinging my eyes. Chris's eyes were shining too. "My phone doesn't have signal, but it has a flashlight," I said shakily. I turned my phone's light on and looked out the window. "Somebody's cut the power line," I said, my heart sinking. Chris sat down and looked at the floor. I checked and double-checked that the doors were locked before sitting next to him and squeezing his hand tightly. We sat there, hand in hand, for what felt like hours, but what was really 45 minutes according to my phone's clock, when out of the corner of my eye, I could see the figure of a person walking outside through the window. "Oh my God!" I screamed. Chris nearly jumped out of his own skin. What? He shouted. There was someone, Chris looked at me. It could have just been a shadow. I really don't think it was. I walked carefully towards the window and looked around. There, on the sidewalk in front of the diner, was a ragged scarecrow splayed out on the pavement. Chris walked over and stood next to me, his eyes settling on the scarecrow as well. We were both speechless. Is this some sort of sick joke? I whispered after a few moments. It may be, Chris replied. The people in our school are nuts. Who would go to all this trouble? Chris was silent for a moment. Nobody. It's 3 o'clock right now. Our shift ends at 6. We can power through. Chris nodded solemnly. We sat back down on our stools by the counter and looked at each other, at a loss for words. Chris was cut off by another loud bang at the door. We both jerked to look at the door, and the scarecrow was slumped against the door. Its sewn eyes stared at me. The tears that had been stinging my eyes earlier ran down my cheeks. From my spot by the counter, I could see that the door was unlocked. We wordlessly stared at the scarecrow for a while. I turned to Chris. I don't know what's happening, I whispered. Chris turned to look back at me. I don't either, Jackie, but we'll get through it. I hugged Chris and enjoyed the brief feeling of safety. Then the door swung open. Without looking at the door, I climbed over the counter and hid behind it. Chris tried to do the same, but something grabbed his shoulders and pulled him backwards onto the floor. I froze for a moment in complete panic. Pulling myself together, I crawled over to the cabinets and dug through the silverware bin, finding the sharpest knife we had. I peeked over the counter. Chris was lying face down in the middle of the floor, and the scarecrow was laying limply on top of him. Chris turned so he was face up, and I saw that his mouth was stuffed with straw. The knife clattered to the floor, and I climbed over the counter. Kneeling next to him, I helped him pull all of the straw out of his mouth, and when most of it was out, he coughed and spluttered. "Kill it," he said hoarsely. I quickly grabbed the knife from the ground as Chris struggled to his feet. Using the knife, I sliced open the scarecrow, causing more straw to spill onto the floor. Chris came to kneel next to me, and he took the knife from my hands, stabbing and slicing the scarecrow until it was just a pile of straw and scraps of fabric. When he was satisfied that the scarecrow wouldn't come back, he dashed over to the kitchen and shoved his head under the faucet, gulping water. The straw had sucked all of the moisture from his mouth, and I could see how relieved he was to be drinking. When he was done, we huddled on the floor, hugging our knees and staying close to each other, saying absolutely nothing. What words could follow something like that? We stayed there until the employees for the next shift came in. I can't imagine how confused they were to come in to find the diner wrecked and covered with straw, and us hiding in the floor. I don't think anyone really believed our story. Honestly, I wouldn't if I were them. Chris and I got a different job, working the same shift, And let's just say, neither of us ever worked the night shift again. Hey everyone, I hope you enjoyed today's video. If you want to see more, let me know in the comments below, and tell me what you thought of this narration. Make sure to follow me on Twitter for updates, and if you'd like to get early videos, shoutouts, and much more, I'd appreciate it if you check out my Patreon page. It's a place where you can help support my channel while getting awesome rewards in the process, and every pledge helps out a ton, no matter the size. So if you'd like to see all the rewards I offer and consider becoming a patron, it'd mean a ton to me if you'd click the link in the description and just check it out. And don't forget to show some love to the amazingly talented authors who make these narrations possible. Have a good night, everybody. Cheers.